you've raised an early position with a small pair, you've been called, and the flop is all high cards. What the hell do you do? This is one of the most frequently asked questions we get in our contact forms at simplifypoker.com. People know they should be raising in early position with small pairs, but then almost every board is an absolute nightmare. So what do we do in those situations, Dara? And let's look at the pre-flop ranges first, I guess. Like how low is a low pair?
Yeah, how low is the low pair is an important question because back when I started playing poker, people used to open every pair from every
Yeah.
seat, irrespective of stack depth. And it's a clear mistake to open hands like threes and twos in early position. Not because those hands are significantly worse than, say, sixes or sevens, but it's just we have too many of them in our range if we're opening them all. I actually played in a university student tournament last night, and one of the questions I got asked was, "What do you do with threes under the gun,
Mm,
20 big blinds?" And my answer was trivial fold. And for a lot of people, that's mind blowing because it's hard to make a pair and hold them, as they say. Um, it's hard to imagine you have to fold a pair, but you do because most of the time you're going to be looking at overcards. You're not blocking any of the hands that are going to continue against you, and you're just going to have too many hands in your range. So that's the first key. First of all, don't have too many of those hands in your range. Have the right amount of them, so that your overall range protects the hands like sixes and sevens when the high cards come. Um, and okay, I'm going to start a very trivial flop first, and then I'm going to get Barry to name some flops. But just for example, if the flop comes ace a2, that's obviously not a good flop for sixes or sevens, but it's a very good flop for our range. So
yes.
the the strategy here is very trivial. I mean, we know we have sixes or sevens, but our opponent doesn't know that. They're thinking about all these really much stronger hands we could have. So we just go ahead and range bet. We don't have to even think about our hand at this point. It's only if we face further resistance in the hand that we have to worry about it.
Yeah.
So let's say we do go ahead and range bet. Um, and our opponent calls. What turn card do you want to look at?
A queen of diamonds.
Queen of diamonds. Our opponent checks. Now
Oh, okay. We
we
still bet. Okay.
this is still a good. Well, remember this was a good card for us.
Mm,
High cards are generally good for us. Just look at the amount of queen X we have, compared to our opponent, who
mm,
is going to have folded most of his queen X on the flop. Always remember as you go from street to street how the betting actions on that street affect.
mm,
Once we bet the flop, they're going to fold most of their king highs and queen highs. Like, why would they ever hang on with queen high?
mm.
Unless,
Yeah. I mean, I think in a sorry to interrupt. I think an aversion people have to firing that second barrel in spots like this, Dara, is they're and they've been told this is a bad thing. They're turning their hand into a bluff when they have a made hand, and they feel like, yeah, okay, well, I'm just going to fold out all the stuff that beats me here. Sorry, it's all the stuff that I beat anyway. Um, and that just doesn't sit right with people. I think people would be much happier barreling with, say, a king 10 here, where they've just picked up a gut shot, than with pocket sixes, which is like if you call the second time, you're obviously crushed.
yeah, that's understandable. But just because you have a pair doesn't mean you have a ton of showdown. Like how good are your sixes actually going to be often? Like your opponent is going to have obviously we're never folding an ace, so we can't really worry about that part of the range. But we can get an eight to fold for sure
Mm,
if we fire the second barrel. And that's kind of what we're targeting when we bet our sixes. We're trying to get that eight to fold, and the eight is folding quite a lot of the time. If you look
yeah,
at all the blue there, and then the other stuff that folds, like even when we folded two, even though we were ahead, they had five outs against us.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so that's quite useful as well, and getting to full gut shots as well. So when you are towards the bottom of your range, in a spot where you have value bets, you have to find bluffs as well. And you can see that the lower the pair, the more frequently we want to bet. Like we want to bet
mm,
sixes far more often than jacks or
mm,
kings, because jacks and kings legitimately have showdown. They're beating all the second pair,
mm.
but sixes isn't. So therefore, it is worth turning it into a bluff. Now, if you bet it all of the time, if you bet sixes all of the time and sevens, you're going to be overdoing it. So you have to temper it a little bit. But yeah, always ask yourself, how much showdown do I really have? And if the answer is little or none, then you should be thinking about bluffing,
Yeah, yeah.
particularly when
Okay,
you get a good card. If the turn card was an eight, that's obviously a very bad card for us. If our opponent checks, now we're going to just check our sixes because we don't have a target to fold anymore. We're not getting an ace to fold. We're definitely not getting an eight to fold now.
no.
So it doesn't really make any sense to go ahead and bluff with our hand, even though kind of we don't have a lot of showdown. We have roughly the same amount of showdown on an eight as we do on a queen, but we're just not going to get people to fold anything now.
Right.
So always have a sort of always bear in mind the hand you're trying to get to fold. When the turn comes to queen, you can go, oh, that's a good card for me. He never has a queen. I have a queen quite a lot. I can bet again now, and he's going to have to start thinking about folding his 8x. He's looking at two overcards to his 8 now.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, do a different board.
well,
Do
let's very briefly wind this on. So say we have got the queen, and we have gone ahead and bet the queen. What size is 33%? And they call. And now let's say a brick falls in the river, 4, and they check. Now we're in a situation where, again, we have to bluff some of the time, and you have to think about your overall range. Sixes is a hand which, again, has little showdown, but at the same time, we can't bluff it all the time because then we'll be over bluffing. And I guess this is what makes these small pairs kind of tricky to play. So often you'll see this, they are a mix. They have to be bluffed some of the time. You can see that in this case, the solver is focusing on suits. It's bluffing specifically. What's the suit it has? It doesn't want to have a diamond.
no, because he wants the other opponent to have a missed flush draw.
A missed backdoor flush draw, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do another flop now.
Yeah. Okay. Go Queen 9-7 with 2 hearts. So this is a dynamic board.
Yeah.
Lots of hands pick up a piece of this. Is the reason I think people would be averse to betting with, say, sixes.
Yeah, but again, you just kind of have to go like when you're playing early position against big blind, you have a very strong range. And with only 20 big blinds in play, like at 100 big blinds, you would be careful perhaps about betting some hands. But with only 20 big blinds, um, your stack off threshold is going to be much lower. Like if you got a top pair, you're just going with it. If you bet king queen and get check raised, you're all in. So your overall range is very, very strong, and it's pretty much close to a range bet. There's a small amount of checking, but you can kind of ignore that. In practice, you can just go ahead and range bet. And there are very few boards that you can't range bet 100%. There are boards like ace queen queen, ace king king, where a lot of your hands don't have a natural incentive to bet. And then there's boards which very much favor the big blinds range, like 6-5-4. But apart from those boards, you can kind of just go ahead and range bet and just take it from there. So with sixes, you can mostly just go ahead and bet. And let's say we use the 33% size, and again, they call. If we get a good turn card, say we get a king, and they check, we can go ahead and bet again because it's a good card for us. They're going to have folded most of their king X on the flop to our bet. On the other hand, if it's a 9, now we're not betting. Because again, the same things apply. When we bet again, we're trying to get a 9 or a 7 to fold. But if the 9 pairs, that sort of, well, we're definitely not getting a 9 to fold now. And we're probably
Dara, just make that 9 of spades a queen. I've just had a kind of minor epiphany. Like, surely this would be a good card to barrel because we've just. Oh no! I was completely wrong there, but my assumption was this would be a good card to barrel because it takes a lot of queen X out of the opponent's range, but I guess it's
It
just
also
taking
takes queen X out of our range, though.
taking it out of our range. So I've had
Uh,
two epiphanies in the space of 15
Yeah,
seconds.
so
That's impressive.
they're less likely to fold a nine now.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. That's a
On a
good point.
king, they'll fold a nine because they're like, well, there's two overcards. But when the queen comes, they're like, oh, wait a minute, there's only two queens left. Does he really
Yeah.
have one of those two queens? So they go like, if they have a nine, they're worried about three cards, the three queens they can't see.
Mm.
If the king comes, they're now worried about six cards, the three queens and the three kings they can't see, in addition to Jack 10, which is now made a straight. But
I've
when
got a
another
fun.
queen comes, suddenly it's shrunk down to only two cards they're worried about.
All right, I've got a fun one for you. Make the queen the six of hearts. So
The flush gets
we
there.
yeah, the flush gets there, but we've just made a set with our pocket sixes. So
Yeah.
no, I think people, yeah. So yeah, this is an always bet, almost always bet.
Yeah. Well, this is like, yeah, I mean, obviously we don't necessarily have the best hand, but we almost certainly do. We're just beating so much now. We're beating all their flop pairs. And apart from the hearts, there are other draws they can have as well, like Jack 10. Yeah, so we can proceed and bet. Okay,
Okay, all right. Go with 952 rainbow for a flop because this is one
952.
where I'd expect some big betting and some checkbacks. So do we make the six as a checkback?
Yeah, so you can see here there is actually a significant amount of checking here.
Mm,
Most of the checking comes from these kind of overcards.
yeah.
Like when you have a hand like King Queen suited, uh, particularly with a backdoor flush draw, like you don't want to bet and get check raised. That's just kind of gross. Your hand has lots of different small amounts of equity now. It has a certain amount of showdown, your
Mm,
king high. It has a weak draw, a weak straight draw, and a weak flush draw. Um, None of those things we really want to bet. And certainly they don't want to get bet and get check raised. So those hands kind of make natural bets. Sorry, more natural checks. But sixes, on the other hand, like sixes is very likely to be the best hand right now.
okay.
Um, but it benefits very heavily from getting our opponents to fold, uh,
Yeah.
because a lot of hands have decent equity against sixes. In addition, I mean, it's strange to think about it, but sixes does actually have some robust equity on, specifically on 952,
Yeah, it could
because
come through
an eight, a
for
seven, a
what,
four, or a three
seven, eight. Yeah.
will give it a gut shot. It can actually turn into a straight by the river. So
Mm.
um,
Sixes is also a hand that we probably don't mind folding to a check raise as well. So we're happier to bet in that regard because it's
yeah, well, look what happens if we do get check raised. Um, Sixes is an interesting one because it's at equilibrium, it's mixing all three. Uh, you can fold it because it's not quite strong enough to continue. You can call because if you fold it all the time, you're folding too often. Or you can raise essentially as a kind of a um it's kind of a bluff, really, but you're gonna have some equity. Like even no matter what you
mm,
run into, you're not going to be dead. Like even if you run into
no,
a set, you can still hit the runner straight in both directions.
yeah.
So it actually makes a reasonable bluff raise. In
Yeah, this is interesting, Dara, because I think some people look at sixes on most boards and think of it as quite a static hand. It is one pair. It's going to stay one pair, and it's probably not going to be the best one pair about a river. So it is, but that's not quite the case. It is more robust than people give it credit for.
Yeah, like anytime you're bluffing, it's nice. It's always nice to have a plan B. It's nice to think that no matter what my opponent has, I'm not dead. But like if you have ace king and your opponent has a set and you check raise all in, you're dead.
Okay.
There's no way you can. Well, I guess you can. Even with ace king, you can hit 4-3, I guess.
Mm,
But with sixes, yeah, it's nice to have that robust equity. And by robust equity, we mean that that equity works against all of the range, irrespective of what our opponent has. Even our opponent has a very strong hand, like a set, where we still have that small amount of equity of being able to hit two runner straights. Um,
mm.
and that's a useful characteristic in a bluff. It kind of becomes a merge bluff in a sense because, to be honest, like most of the hands, like when we do move all in, if we look at what folds, there's really not too much worse than, well, sorry, not too much better than sixes, if anything. Is there anything there that's better than sixes? No, there isn't. Not so like a nine never folds. Um, but that's not that's kind of not the point. We still benefit from all the folds because
Mm.
they all have equity against us. And even when we do run into a nine, um, we still have a chance to get there.
Just go back to the flop, Dara. I'm curious about a bet sizing. I'm curious about bet sizing here, Dara. Now, there's a mix of bet sizes. We have a medium bet size and I guess two small bet sizes. I'm guessing the sixes will form mostly the small bet sizes. And I believe the reasoning would be obviously we're targeting the weaker hands, so we don't want to put any more in than we need to. And then we'll protect that range by maybe making our sets to small bet sizes. Have I given a good overview there or have I missed anything?
Yeah, I think you've given a good overview, but I also think it's overkill, if I'm honest. Like,
Oh, really? Okay, go
I
on.
think you know the solver's using three sizes here: 20%, 33%, 55%. If we go into the AI tool and get it to create a one size solution, I think it's going to come in somewhere in or around the 33%, 33 to 40. Actually, it's coming in even smaller, 25%. So it's just
Mm,
going with 25%. Um, I don't think we need to split our sizes here. It's just a little bit of overkill.
mm,
Um, anything around 25, 33 is fine.
mm.
But and that's just kind of our overall range. Like our overall range has no real reason to bet big here. Um, the 852 board might be different because there's far more open enders, obviously. Yeah, on 852 we're worried there's far more open enders and gut shots. So now we are using almost half pot, and actually now six is doing a decent amount of checking.
Yeah.
Um, because there are just so many more hands that are going to call us, and we're not going to know where we are a lot of the time when we do get called. Like any card, any low card is going to be a scare card for us. So any card nine or lower. Uh, so we have less incentive to bet with both our range and specifically pocket sixes here, and the same is true of sevens as well.
It strikes me that for players that struggle to play a small pair on a board full of high cards, because everything is a scare card essentially to them, the remedy is to just think more in terms of your range.
Yeah, this is why you should always be thinking in terms of your range. And one of the big lessons solvers taught us early on was in a spot where we have no natural bluffs, we use our lowest pairs as bluffs because they
Mm.
unblock all the stuff we're trying to get to fold. And
Right, right.
this blew people's minds when they're looking at boards like Ace, King, Queen, and they're seeing pocket twos triple barreling it off, and it doesn't seem to make any sense. But like you're trying to get a king or a queen presumably with another high card to fold by the end. So having pocket twos is actually great because you're unblocking all those hands.
We talk about natural bluffs in poker, and one type of natural bluff is when you have a blocker or an unblocker, as you said. Another type of natural bluff is when you have a semi bluff, a hand that can improve. I think people are much more comfortable semi bluffing with a hand that can make a straight than they are bluffing with a hand that unblocks folds. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense because obviously one of the other great heuristics we learned from solvers was betting hands that can improve in lots of different ways. You know, the double backdoor hand being the classic one.
Yeah.
Uh, Funny enough, I did a university student tournament last night, and one of the guys check raised 9-5 suited on a 10-6-6 board with a backdoor
Mm,
flush draw.
yeah.
And when his opponent folds, he showed and he said, I learned that from GTO Simplified. Um, because and his opponent was a little bit stumped, and he was, and so we kind of explained to him, well, if a spade comes, we pick up a flush draw. If an eight or seven comes, we pick up a straight draw. So, and if a nine or a five comes, we'll often have the best hand against two high cards. That's a very easy heuristic to apply and to learn. But like everything else, it can be over applied. And in some spots, we just don't have enough natural bluffs. And you always have to have bluffs. And the solver is very good at picking out, going, okay, I need this amount of bluffs. What are the best hands to use? And it's very easy to find them on boards where we have double backdoor hands. But when we don't have those types of hands, we often have to go further afield. And often we just turn the bottom of our range, which uh, will be suited connectors with no connectivity to the board or low pairs that haven't hit. And they'll just be our worst hands. And they'll also be unblocking the types of hands that we're trying to get to fold.
And then just to bookend this video, Dara, just go back to the pre-flop ranges. I just the opening range for under the gun.
Yeah.
Yes, so to bookend this video, Dara, let's just have one more quick look at the pre-flop ranges. So as the small pairs of sevens and sixes in this situation, I think players who struggle playing small pairs from early position on most flops, one of the solutions they create for themselves is to just shove them pre-flop. I was incredibly guilty of this until very, very recently. Why is it not a great idea to just open shove with sixes, sevens? And
Well, in a lot
why
of
is it a
cases,
difficult decision?
yeah, in a lot of cases, it's not even that profitable. Like if we look at the EV of shoving, like sixes actually is not even a profitable shove.
No.
Sevens is slightly unprofitable. You have to go all the way up to eights before you have profitability, and then the lower pairs are going to be even worse. In ICM extreme situations, it can often get even worse. Like near a bubble, if we have 20 big blinds. Let's take a realistic example where the people behind have more. You can see what actually happens is we just narrow our range even more. Like now we're not really opening sixes or sevens, except some of the time. Even eights is mostly just folding. And eights as a shove is actually losing a fortune. So it's not a case of like, oh, well, it's profitable to shove. Yes, it's profitable in chips. It's not profitable in ICM terms.
No,
Um,
we cover this in post-flop ICM simplified. Before we get to the post-flop stuff, we actually do a detailed analysis of pre-flop ranges. And one of the big takeaways from that is you actually exert way more ICM pressure on your opponent when you keep the pot small by min raising. Because when you open shove with a hand like say sixes or eights, you make everyone have very easy decisions pre-flop. Whereas if we open with pocket sixes, and they have to call, then you can exert ICM pressure on later streets, which is way more profitable.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and yeah, and definitely don't overdo the shoves. And this is near a bubble. Obviously, that's a very extreme ICM situation. But even late on, say like on a final table, with 8 players left, if we find ourselves under the gun with 20 big blinds, um, and everybody else is fairly deep, we're one of the shorter stacks. Again, you'll see we're just staying away from the small pairs. We're even staying away from the medium pairs for the most part. And we're certainly not shoving them. Like shoving sevens is an absolute torch.
Yeah. So my
And
go on.
sorry, and that's true even as the stacks get shallower. Like let's look at 12 big blinds. Like even at 12 big blinds, we just fold sevens and sixes. Which
Mm.
again, a lot of people would think, oh well, we have to
Oh
shove
yeah.
those hands. You're not losing a fortune shoving them at this stage, but it's not profitable, and you're better off just raising. And I remember when my friend Dan Wilson was deep in the Irish Open, um, the year Steve O'Dwyer won, and he got nines under the gun and he raised folded, and people couldn't understand what was going on. But in ICM extreme situations, that's kind of it's certainly better than shoving. I think he would run into jacks or something had he just shoved. And it's one of those things where like the outcome is usually good. Usually when you shove nines, everybody folds.
Yeah.
But when you get the bad outcome, it's really, really bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Steve O'Dwyer, who won the student tournament you were playing last night as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Um,
Yeah, Steve has rekindled his glory days.
my big two takeaways from this video, Dara. The first one I kind of knew before we got into the video. The second one I really didn't. Um, playing small pairs from early position and then going to the flop. First of all, think in terms of your range, not in terms of your actual hand, and that will usually steer you right. Second one, having a small pair unblocks lots of folds, which is not something I'd ever really thought about at all. I
Yeah.
just thought we bluffed with small pairs because we decided that our hand was otherwise useless, so we may as well turn it into a bluff. Not the case.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Always when you're thinking of bluffing, think about your overall range and realize the bluffs are going to have to come from the bottom of the range. And think about what you're trying to get to fold and bluff with hands that don't block those. For more free content like this, including some free courses, free videos, and a free ebook on how to study, go to simplifypoker.com/free.